This is session 7, which is our transportation element of our Focus 2030 Comprehensive Plan update. So again, this is kind of halftime. We'll be going over transportation today. We'll be going over next month. We'll do housing, and then in October we'll do future land use, and then hopefully have some recommendations in November and start the adoption process based on those recommendations. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. What I'll do is I'll just introduce Carissa Lemon, who is our Mpo Coordinator here at the Planning Commission, and she'll go over a few things, and then she will introduce the rest of our panel, and we'll just go ahead and get started. Carissa?
All right, welcome everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, then I'll skip the microphone. Like Ben said, I'm Carissa Lemon with the Bowling Green, Warren County Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. If you guys aren't familiar with the MPO, we are kind of the overarching transportation planning organization for the community. And I'm starting our introductions because I can't do my job without all of these people from the county, city, and KYTC. They are part of what makes the MPO, as well as you all, the public. So it's largely a collaborative effort between our public and our stakeholders and our local elected officials as well. So the MPO does transportation planning. We don't deal with design or right-of-way, utilities, or construction or maintenance. So what we do is just kind of the starting stages of some of the transportation projects that happen throughout the community. And we'll kind of touch base on that a little bit throughout this presentation. And if you guys have any questions at any point in time, feel free to interrupt any of us at any point and just raise your hand, and we will try to answer those questions to clarify anything that you guys might need. And I'm going to pass it on to Josh Moore with the Warren County Public Works Department.
Yeah, so Josh Moore, Warren County Public Works, and I think looking at my notes, or Chris's notes, we'll talk about what we do at Public Works. So our office kind of is kind of an overarching for 4 or 5 departments. We've got building electric inspection, code enforcement, engineering services, stormwater management, engineering design, forgetting one. Biggest one that probably is important to this office is this meeting is our road department. So we've got roughly 750 miles of county roads to maintain. We do everything from just routine maintenance to overlays, pipe replacements. We also do right-of-way mowing, mosquito spraying, and those things that come along with those public rights-of-way. Also in our office, we do the review for new subdivisions. So anything new that's coming in as far as residential and commercial developments with public infrastructure. So we review the layouts for the streets for conformance with the subdivision regulations. We make recommendations on traffic improvements. We look at drainage plans. So kind of in a nutshell, that's what our Public Works department is. What's it?
I'm Melissa Kanzler, City Engineer for the City of Bowling Green, and I, like Josh, am in the Public Works Department, just one of the many departments of the city. Our department has multiple divisions, we call them. I'm actually in the Planning and Design Division. We also have our Operations Division, which is like the road crew, the guys who actually are out there doing the work. We have Facilities Management, who oversees the maintenance and any new building projects or facilities, and then we have our administration and then our fleet. A lot of people don't realize that fleet is under Public Works, and what our fleet department does is manage all the vehicles for the entire city, and that includes police cars and fire trucks. For planning and design, which really relates to what we're here today, our office, much like his, we work with the MPO, we work with the state and county for any new capital improvement projects, which the city would fund. That's roadway, sidewalks, stormwater, any of those things within the city limits. It's important that we work closely with everybody so that we can forecast, what they have planned, and so that it all works well together. We actually also oversee the paving every year of our city streets. We have, and I'm going to venture to guess, lane miles. We probably have close to 300 miles of city streets, and don't quote me on that. We reported lane miles and then just miles, so I get those two confused every year. So like Josh, we also are involved with the Planning Commission with new development. So we're not just looking at the projects that we fund and we pay for and oversee, whether it be new shop lanes, new roads. We're actually reviewing the plans for developer-driven projects where new subdivisions come in, because the city does not build those streets. We just make sure that they are built to our standard. Once they're finished, they become our maintenance and ours forever. So the people that buy houses and build houses in those areas, they know that they have maintenance of the streets, the stormwater, sweeping, leaf pickup, and those kind of things. So we coordinate with all the agencies and utilities for any new development. That in a nutshell, I feel like I'm missing a lot, but we can get into that later. I'll turn it over to Joe Plunk.
Hello, I'm Joe Plunk. I'm the Chief District Engineer for Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. So think of that as the state DOT. So our office covers 10 counties in South Central Kentucky. Our district office is here in Bowling Green, but we cover 10 counties in South Central Kentucky. So we have more of a statewide focus. Think about roads in the area that have numbers, like US 31W or US 68, I-65. Those would fall under the state's responsibility. And any of the, whether it's design, maintenance, construction, traffic operations, any of that on a state-maintained roadway would be under our jurisdiction. And of course, we work together through the MPO with the city and the county, because a lot of times our responsibilities overlap, for instance, at an intersection, for example. So we have maintenance crews that are out filling potholes or mowing or fixing traffic signals, putting in traffic signals. A lot of our work, though, is contracted. So if you see construction, say for instance Nashville Road out in the Rich Pond area, any kind of construction like that is almost always handled by putting out bids for contracts, contractors. You see Scotty's most of the time in this area doing a lot of that kind of heavy construction work. So that's primarily our responsibility. Within Warren County, we have about 400 miles of state-maintained roadways, and that of course includes the interstate and Natcher Expressway, which is also an interstate. And I think that pretty well. Approximately 100 traffic signals in Bowling Green, but it's more than just in Bowling Green area, it's Warren County, so a lot of the questions that come up today will be about outside of Bowling Green, but in Warren County. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. So the next section we're going to go over as quickly is just existing projects. I think it's important that we identify projects that are being constructed now and maybe within the next few years. And Joe, I think you're first on the list, so we'll start with the state projects because there's a lot of good stuff going on, and I'll turn this map back on while you talk.
So the map that Ben is pulling up, it is an interactive map that you can find on our webpage at transportation.ky.gov. You can find the link to the map. Is this our map or is this the NPO's?
Yeah.
It should.
Yeah. So you'll see once it pulls up, there are highlighted roadways. Those highlighted roadways represent roads that are funded in some measure through the latest 2-year highway plan. So you'll hear us talk about budgets because we all work within budgets. And the legislature, so your elected officials, your state senators, your state representatives, they pass a highway plan that is enacted, the governor signs it, so executive branch and legislative branch put this together with a lot of input from the MPO. So we all are at the table, and you're invited to these meetings as well as we meet as a technical advisory committee to nominate projects. We use a lot of data to inform our decisions, and that data includes safety, so think about crash statistics, think about mobility, so you're thinking which roads have the most traffic on it. So that's where the focus is primarily on those needs, as well as infrastructure maintenance like bridges. The older the bridges, the more likely they're going to need to be replaced soon. The older the pavements, worse condition, the more likely they need to be paved sooner. So you'll see the highway plan that was just enacted in April, signed by the governor. Those are our marching orders for the next 2 years. And thankfully, it includes a lot of those corridors. As I mentioned before, we have a more of a statewide view from our agency. So you're looking at roads like Three Springs Road widening out to Long Road. You're looking at Cemetery Road out to Fountain Trace. Louisville Road out to and beyond Miscom. In fact, I don't think that's even showing the project that was added this year includes widening out to Freeport Road. So we're taking a couple miles at a time on these corridors, like US 31W Nashville Road. Who can believe that just 12 years ago, Nashville Road at Campbell Lane was a 2-lane road? You know where Cheddar's is and Graves Gilbert and all that? It was a 2-lane road with some intermittent turn lanes. It's hard to imagine. That was just 12 years ago. So widening out to the Natcher, the next phase was widening out to Dillard Road, and now Scotty's is widening that section out to Buchanan Park. There's also a project that's in the budget that includes widening out to the Simpson County line. So all of these corridors, Richardsville Road, it would take quite a while to go through each one. I won't do that, but maybe you'll have a question about a specific project. Obviously, a lot of the data needs are here in the urban area because that's where more traffic is occurring. There's also, potentially more crashes in those areas. So the data supports those investments more so than, say, out in a rural area. But to be sure, there are projects in rural areas. Richardsville Road, that project, we've been talking about it for years. We've had public meetings. That project has been scaled down somewhat, but there are still projects where we're out buying right-of-way from Runner Road out to Penns Chapel Road. We're still in the design phase from Mount Pleasant. What's the church that's out there? Mount Pleasant Church, all the way to Butler County, where we're fixing curves, the Snake Hill, as we refer to it, those geometric issues there that have created some crash experiences. The curves at Plano, that's still some, it's a growing area, but it's out of the Bowling Green city limits. The S curves there at Collett, beyond Natcher, that's on the highway plan this year. So there are a lot of opportunities that are in the plan. There's funding that's backing those up. But a lot of projects we talk about that don't make the plan, and there's always another opportunity for it to be in the next 2-year cycle. So our focus again is mobility and safety, primarily maintenance of our existing infrastructure. We always ask ourselves, what can we do to maintain what we have versus building new? Because everything new that we build is another, I don't want to say burden, but it's another responsibility in perpetuity that the taxpayer will have to pay for. So we're always trying to improve on what we have versus building more and more new stuff. But obviously there are times where we have to build new. Some of you may have attended some meetings back in 2020. They were virtual at the time, but looking at a potential new interchange on I-65, either in Woodburn or in the Plano Rich Pond area. That was a planning study. We got input. We looked at data. We made recommendations, but that's as far as it went, at least for now. So it is there. It's published. It's online. You can read those recommendations, and hopefully one day that project will be funded. Same thing with Elrod Road. We had meetings on that. Many of you may have attended back in 2014. So far, it's not gone beyond a preliminary design. And maybe one day there'll be a funded project that we can acquire rights of way and move utilities and construct. But right now, it's just more of a dream, I guess you could say. It's a potential project, but it's not funded. So you hear about these kind of projects over the years that they go through a planning phase, but they don't get any further than that. The planning phase is, of course, a critical first step before it can ever get to that next phase. So this is a very helpful map, and we may refer to it throughout the evening.
When you say widening, like for Cemetery Road examples, you're talking about going to 3 lanes, 4 lanes?
So you may have seen some flagging, some utility markings. We have just recently brought on contract a consultant to do the design work, and that scope is not quite determined yet. So it could be 3 lanes from end to end, but more likely it's going to be improving the roadway that we have. So 2 lanes with wider shoulders and clear zones. And what I mean by that is right now, if you drop off the shoulder, you're probably going down the hill. Whereas if we can provide softer slopes, wider shoulders, we can give more clearance for any errant vehicle that's running off the road. Clearly some turn lanes at subdivision entrances like Fountain Trace and others along the way. So there'll be some widening, but a lot of it is just improving the existing 2-lane rural road.
Well, they did a lot of that last year. Cemetery Road, a lot of it.
A lot of folks don't realize that the work that was done in the last 2 years did widen the pavement. We have some shoulder now that we didn't have. The lane went from 10 feet to almost 11 feet. As a driver, it's not that noticeable, but it does make a big difference, as every inch does help in the case of an errant vehicle. And the biggest killer on Kentucky roadways is single vehicle run off the road crashes in a rural area. hitting an object like a tree or a power pole. So anything that we can do in those rural areas doesn't mean building expressways or widening the 3 lanes or more. It can just mean improving the geometry to make it a safer roadway.
I assume you take into consideration, like going out in asphalt, all the construction that's going out there, instead of just widening it a little bit, we might as well put 4 lanes in here, so we're gonna need it 5, 10 years anyway, right?
Yeah, so clearly there are areas like Rich Pond with the school where you do need more lanes. There's not enough capacity for the growth of the school, and so that's why we're building extra lanes in both directions and the turning lanes. But in some areas, that's not the case. Richardsville will be a 2-lane road with wide shoulders, but it just depends on the situation.
Well, much like Joe, we're looking at relieving congestion and keeping an eye on safety. But with the highways, the numbered highways, our lift isn't nearly as large as his. So we have a lot of the neighborhood streets. Our biggest concerns, are the Smallhouse roads, the Cave Mill roads, some of those main collectors, as we call them, in town. But the heavier ones are the Scottsville roads and the Nashville. Now, we do work closely with Joe through the Mpo, so these studies, we're involved heavily in that, the recommendations, the reviews, and so we do get involved in that. But within the city, just to go over some projects that we have going currently and the ones that are funded for the current budget year, FY23, of course, Shive Lane, it is now renamed Campbell Boulevard all the way through. Currently working on that. Scotty's is out there and they've really picked up the pace. Where the roundabout is currently at the old Shive, we will pick up there and widen to a 3-lane section with curb and gutter and a multi-use path all the way through to Middlebridge and over that hill. And there'll be another roundabout that Middlebridge will realign to, and then it will go all the way to Lover's Lane at Searcy. So there'll be a new signal at that intersection, and then the signal at Middlebridge and the signal at Fruit of the Loom will come down, because you'll have a connection to the new road from each side, so everybody will come out there. The roundabouts along Weston, we just finished the one at the high school there at Rockingham. I don't know if everybody's got to drive that. It seems to be working well. We do have the next one planned at Ashley Circle in Weston. We are almost to the point to purchase property. Similar, kind of a smaller scale, nothing like we have out at Shive Lane, but we'll move traffic. So if you know Ashley Circle at Weston, kind of just past Ford's Furniture, that little awkward intersection there will be a roundabout soon. Speaking of Ashley Circle, some other projects we have coming up very soon and we'll go out to bid is adding lanes at both legs of Ashley Circle by Ford's Furniture and down by Greenview Hospital, and then across at Ashley Street at Double Docks. And we've worked really close with Joe and his traffic folks, because the backup, they have to give Scottsville Road, especially at peak hours, the go. We want to get as many people through our streets as we can. So by adding an additional turn lane at all those locations, we hope to improve that, make the light a little more efficient, and get people through there. So that should be out to bid before too long and in construction as well. We'll also be adding a right in, right out at what used to be the Hobby Lobby, if anybody knows where that is, to kind of help relieve the two ends. So if anything was to come in there and really get that center busy again, and the people that use it today, the gym, they can get in and out there a lot better. Some other things that the downtown streetscape projects, the new sidewalks, bike lanes, we're going to build on that this coming year. It's called Phase 3, looking at maybe going up the hill towards Western College and State, possibly going out to Center and Chestnut Street with some more bike lane facilities, some more street trees, parking, some different things to kind of give you that. We got rid of the racetrack around Fountain Square, what we called it, and kind of squared that off so people can actually walk a little bit better. So we improve safety down there, we slow people down, and hopefully we've helped bring and attract more people to the downtown area. So that's coming this year. A couple other just programs that we have are our sidewalk program. That's an annual program. We have $500,000 to put towards new sidewalks. So we are always open. If you don't have sidewalk in your neighborhood, you can let us know. Likely it's on the list. We have almost 200 projects on the list right now that we prioritize annually. So we're roughly getting about a mile of sidewalk a year with that, new sidewalk. So if you're close to a school or a park, or maybe it's a small segment that fills in a gap, those are the places we're trying to get sidewalk network built out in the city. Similar, we have a new greenways program where we have $400,000 a year for new greenways. So again, that's just in the city limits, but it's kind of an infill to get those links from, say, like we have the new greenway on Smallhouse, a multi-use path, to try to get people to those paths that already exist. So much like our sidewalk program, we score those based on their proximity to attractions or high-density living, maybe perhaps people who would be more apt to bike or walk than they would to drive a car. So we're looking at those. There's more coming up, but our overlay project where we pave our streets every year, we roughly get about $2 million a year. Possibly about 16 miles of roadway to be paved with that, depending on prices, but that's what we're hopeful for. And with that, we are mandated to upgrade any handicap ramps along those streets. So we're slowly, I don't know if you've noticed, or, you know, unless you have that need, you don't notice, but we're about to catch up. We've got a lot of our handicap ramps compliant for the slopes and the detectable warning plates, but that's part of our overlay. So last year, I think we put in 60 new ones with our paving projects. So, yes, ma'am.
When a city street has had a lot of new construction on it, so it's been cut multiple times for utilities, how many years is it until it gets another overlay?
Well, if it's not very good, guys, it'll pop up on our needs list pretty quick. There are, I know of two right off the top of my head that because of that very instance, either the gas company or the water will be back in there this coming year to pave them. So it affects the rideability is what it affects. And we do have someone come in and drive these streets with the right equipment and basically give it a score. I go out and make sure, you know, and look at them physically, and that's what we choose from. But those typically will score low and rise to the top.
How do you report one? I drive over one every day, it's horrible.
You can call me, or you can go through the website. You can just tell me which one it is.
Goat landing road.
It's on the list. It'll get paid. We know. But anyway, in a nutshell, that's it. We have a lot of, if there's any questions, www.bgky.org.
The bike lane on State Street, what's the feedback been on that?
It's been kind of mixed. You know, a lot of people want the bike lanes, but then they're like, well, it doesn't go anywhere. But you got to start somewhere. But I think it's, you know, we're trying to connect the downtown to the river. And then ultimately we want to go up the hill as far as we can and then connect other places, you know. So it's been mixed. I don't see a lot of riders. We hope.
I ride it a couple times.
Yeah.
People complain, who's going to ride that? Well, I do, but
Well-
I never see traffic backed up or anything.
Well, if you don't build it, you know they're not going to use it. So in my opinion, you know, it'll take time, and we're not necessarily a heavy bikeway community yet, but you know, I think we got to push that direction. So.
Excuse me, Ben?
Yes.
Melissa called my attention. On the sidewalks, when a new subdivision is built in the county, are developers mandated to build sidewalks in those subdivisions?
Generally, yes, and that's a great segue to Josh, so I'll go ahead and let Josh go and do his spiel.
Well, I'll answer your question first. Yes, so in the subdivision regulations, there's some guidelines on when sidewalks are required. And in real simple terms, it's almost every development that is sewered. So if you've got the 1 acre lots out in the county, oftentimes there's not a requirement for the sidewalks in those. However, we've seen a lot of the developers choosing to do some sort of sidewalk trail network associated with those larger lot subdivisions. But yes, in the smaller ones, you are going to see it. One of the things that we balance and Ben does with his staff is that the developer commits to putting the sidewalks in. However, they don't get constructed until the homes are built. So you've got kind of this patchwork quilt construction of these sidewalks. And so combination of building inspectors, Ben's engineering staff, try to make sure they go in a timely fashion, and there's usually some construction bond money held for a period to ensure that those residents living there at certain time period that all of those sidewalks do get connected. Honestly, it seems to be that's changed. You know, when I first 20 years ago, we were only getting sidewalks in a handful. Now it's kind of become the norm, and I think with the denser development that we're building right now, I think it's almost a necessity. So for the county, I'll probably be more brief than these folks. Due to some funding constraints, the county's capital improvement projects are usually a lot smaller, fewer and far between. But we do have some that have been wrapped up. Just to kind of give you a frame of reference for what we do. We finished the roundabout at Smallhouse Road in Elrod. We've done some improvements to that to try to make that a little better than the initial construction. But that was a project that was kind of went hand in hand with a large residential development that was taking place on Elrod Road. So a lot of times the results of a traffic impact study or discussions with the developer on the zoning level facilitate the talk about what do we need to improve in that area, and that was one of those things that the county knew that was already an intersection that had a lot of rear-end collisions and a lot of delay time. Just working a three-way intersection didn't move traffic as well, and we knew that the roundabout was a way to continue to keep traffic moving a little safer. We've also done some improvements last year. We repaired and kind of renovated the old Richardsville Road Bridge that had some deficiencies in it. We kind of brought that back up to get it another 20 years of life, hopefully. That's a project we finished. We've also done some road widening and additional lanes on Beach Bend Road. Those was a project to try to help mitigate the effects of some of these large motorsports events that are happening in that area. And that gave the ability for the first time in the county to be able to run traffic 2 lanes in, 1 way out, or flip-flop it in the other direction. So that's something we worked with Beach Bend and the Visitors Bureau for all their motorsports committees, and we work through all those type of events to figure out what's best to be done there. For the most part, for Public Works and our road department, it's maintenance. Like I said, 750 plus miles of road in the county, and we tend to be accepting somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 miles a year of new residential and some commercial streets. So that number is growing, and like I said, our funding for those projects is somewhat small. We've been fortunate to take advantage of some grant opportunities and some funding streams that are available through the state that are helpful. We tend to do a lot of stormwater projects. A lot of times we're working on repair to aging infrastructure. The city does a lot of these as well, where you've got old storm pipe that's been in the ground for 20, 30 years, and we're starting to see the need to replace and repair some of those as they fail. We do a lot of shouldering. That's one of the things that you don't see as much in city streets, but our road department throughout the year is out putting gravel or asphalt shoulders on roads, just because on our narrow roads you tend to get drop-offs, and those become a challenge for motorists if they get a wheel off the road. So we spend a lot of time doing that type of repair. We are still a rural road department, but we're moving into more of an urbanized setting, as you can see with all the growth we've got out in the county. So we are trying to equip our folks with newer technology, with a little different skills that they didn't always need to have. And so that's we're in a kind of a growing period for our county road department right now. Very encouraged with the folks that we've got and the strides we've made in the last few years, but trying to do better to respond to citizen requests. We spend 95% of the road department time responding to citizen requests, everything from street signs that get knocked down or stolen to high weeds on an intersection. So that's the majority of our work.
Have you eliminated most low water pools?
Yes, the county, I believe, has. I think all of ours are. There's one still in place, but it's non-trafficked, is the one at Romanza Johnson Park, and that we're actually doing a stormwater project there, a water quality project, to maybe remove that and improve that for kayak and fishing and make it safer and clean up the stream banks there. But yeah, actually, I think all of there is still one on Goodrum Road. Had been rebuilt prior to my time. It doesn't go under as often, but it still goes under half a dozen times a year. I think that's the last one that we have.
All right, and I will finish us up with this portion of our presentation. Just talk about a little bit of the projects that Mpo has done and what we have coming up in this next year. So some examples of studies that we've done in the past. We do a lot of contract work with consultants for transportation-related studies. So as Joe mentioned, we worked with KYTC on the I-65 interchange feasibility study. And that was through KYTC, not through the Mpo, but it was a partnership with them. We've done the Fairview Avenue corridor study a couple years ago. I think that was in 2018. We recently did the US 31W bypass road diet feasibility study. And so we've done quite a few studies like that, but then we've also done some transit studies, and we do provide assistance to the local transit agency, and that's managed through the city of Bowling Green and operated through community action. And so we do work hand in hand with them and provide assistance to them as needed for any sort of planning matters, GIS work, and just being a funnel for federal transit funding, planning funds for them as well. And then on the bicycle and pedestrian side, so the MPO deals with all forms of transportation, like we were talking about, all the roadways, transit, and bicycle and pedestrian. And so we deal with a lot of the greenways and our bikeways. Ashley said that they do a lot with greenways and sidewalks and bike lanes, and they do a lot of that planning, but we work with them and partner with them for a lot of that work as well. So our bicycle and pedestrian master plan was last updated in 2014, and over the past year we've been working to update that. And we have projects posted on our web map here. Right now we're just looking at some of our existing facilities. But that master plan just kind of takes a snapshot of where we are today and where we want to grow to be into the future. And so that's just looking at various greenways projects. And one of the things that we try to talk about a lot is the loop. We've done some public input and stakeholder input and tried to reach out to some of our local user groups. And one of the things that we get a lot of complaints on is that our greenways are not connected, that we don't have continuous miles of greenways facilities, and we want to provide that. We want to connect our greenways. We want to connect what we have so that people will be able to enjoy our community on bike or on foot, or if they don't have a vehicle, we want to provide access for them to safely be able to transport to wherever they need to be. And so that's just a lot of the work that we've done in this master plan update and a lot of the work that we do on the bicycle and pedestrian side of the MPO. So Ben is pulling up a map of the loop, and its proposed route is about 20 miles. I don't know the exact numbers of what we have funded, but I want to say we have about 8 miles left to be funded. As you can see here, there's a solid green line, and those are our existing greenways facilities. The dotted green lines, you have some over here on Lover's Lane, some dotted ones, and then up in the west end. Those are funded greenways trails, but they are not yet constructed, and those would be part of the loop as well. And then these yellow lines and the dotted yellow lines, those are the proposed route for the loop that would provide a connection of greenways around the city. And so those would all be a dedicated shared use path. They wouldn't be on-road facilities, but they would all be off-road facilities. Some of them would be adjacent to the roadway, some of them may not. We just have a lot of right-of-way restrictions in planning, some of what you might consider your more traditional greenways that are more of your nature paths or off-road or kind of in the middle of the field. We don't have very many of those. We do have restrictions, and that can make it hard to fund some of those. What else? Smallhouse road study. So something that we have coming up this next year is we're going to be looking at a corridor study for traffic improvements along Smallhouse Road from Campbell Lane to the intersection with Three Springs Road. That's not out for bid yet, but we will be putting that out soon and have a consultant lead that work over the next year and hopefully have some recommendations for improvements to go from there. And so we're recognizing something that we're going to get into here in a little bit is just recognizing the need to accommodate for our growing community, accommodate for the neighborhoods that are being developed in the southern portion of the county. And Smallhouse Road is one of those examples of roadways that are just local roadways that are getting increasingly amounts of traffic, and we're just wanting to be a little bit proactive in trying to accommodate for ways that we can improve that. So that's just some of the work that the MPO does, and I think we're going to move on to some panel questions.
Yeah, so we've got 4 questions just to kind of start the conversation. There's no really right or wrong answer. It's just opinions of, we'll start with answers here, and then after that, we just, all the rest of the time we have schedules for any questions you all want to ask, and we'll try to answer those. So the first question is, what do you think the biggest transportation challenge is in our community? And Joe, you want to start, or pass it off however you want to do it?
Well, I think we would all agree that growth is the challenge. So growth is a good thing. but growth creates a challenge. I think of it as if my family is expanding. Let's say I'm having, my family's having a child every couple of years, and I go from 2 kids to 4 kids or 6 kids, but my income is still the same, and my house is still the same size. That's the analogy that I try to portray with Bowling Green, is we're growing quickly, but there's still a budget to live within. And that transportation budget is, for us anyway, is on a statewide basis. So it's not based on the population of Bowling Green or property taxes. It's based on gas tax. It's divvied up amongst 120 counties. So that's the challenge to me, is the growth. We try to be proactive, but unfortunately a lot of times we're having to react. Growth on Three Springs Road has been going on for 20 years, and we're just talking about buying property to widen the road. And South Warren High School opened in 2010, and we're out there now widening. We should have been out there 10 years ago. And that's just an unfortunate aspect of the industry that we're in, is we're often having to follow up and be reactive. So to me, that's the biggest challenge.
Well, to add a little to that, in the confined to city limits area, it all goes back to the funding side, but space. We have some major roadways, Smallhouse, Cave Mill. Obviously, portions of those roads need to be widened. We're going to have to buy property. We just don't have the space. And the road itself isn't always the highest price tag. You get into utilities, there's power poles right on the edge of all those roadways. You're obviously going to have to get in someone's front yard. And in Smallhouse, the case, this last leg where we're building, I forgot to mention the multi-use path on into town, where we're not widening. If we had widened that, which we wanted to, it made sense to, we were going to have to take homes, take whole properties. So we, in the city, it's space, really, to go back and handle the traffic that is generated from the county, but obviously they work and play in the city, and we just don't have space.
I would say the same. I was even thinking further back, almost, the way this town and county have grown is we all work in we work in one location, but we live way in the other locations. And so the fact that it's such an impact to our network of roads to get from where you live to where you work, just to see some of the growth in the south end of the county, and the fact that our largest maybe commercial or industrial growth is in the farther extreme ends of this county now in the industrial park. But a lot of those people live in near Simpson County. So just the spread, I guess you would call it, that we have is probably one of the biggest challenges I see, that really taxes some of the county's smaller roads that were never designed for the amount of traffic that are traveling them out, just to get people in different directions.
Oh, I was going to add too, I was asked at a planning commission meeting 3 or 4 years ago about a development that was proposed at Smallhouse and Campbell Lane. Pretty small development, relatively speaking, but the question was asked, Mr. Plonk, is this development going to impact traffic at Smallhouse and Campbell Lane? The answer is yes, but that development in Rich Pond is going to impact the intersection of Smallhouse and Campbell Lane. The development down Scottsville Road in Alberton, everyone uses Campbell Lane. So, it doesn't, yes, we're always focused on the immediate half-mile radius, but all that growth that we're talking about is affecting the entire road network.
So that's a good segue, and one of the questions we get asked all the time, all of us, is when a development is proposed, how do you determine traffic impacts, or what improvements you're going to recommend, or whether or not they need a traffic impact statement? And just to bring everybody up to speed, we do consult with our sister agencies on every rezoning, and generally also when construction plans are sent to our office. So there are those 2 points where we do have input at trying that holistic approach. So kind of given that context, I know you've been, Josh, you've been going first.
I think the first thing is to understand what a traffic study does. In kind of simplistic terms, a traffic study looks at a development and how it affects intersections and roadways around it. Usually create what's called a level of service at this intersection. An example would be if Joe's development he's talking about, if that intersection at Campbell Lane and Smallhouse operated at a level B, and you built this development, does it change that intersection to function as a C or a D or a E, worse or better? So that's really what a traffic study does. And then what we tend to do is to look at those road networks and those intersections around that proposed development and determine, we may already know what the problems and the challenges are at that location. And the traffic study doesn't necessarily, is not going to tell us anything we didn't already know, not to toot our own horns, but most of us in this community know where our problem areas are. So what then we tend to do is work with that developer to waive that traffic study in lieu of improvements that we negotiate together. Because we would rather take the $10,000 in 6 months it takes to get a traffic study done and use that towards improvements. We often get accused of not thinking about how it affects an intersection or a roadway, but I can promise that is something that all of us look at. But yes, so in a nutshell, that's how that could turn into additional turn lanes, that could be some road widening, it could be just an overlay of an existing road that's in poor shape. We kind of have the flexibility of coming up with ideas, and there is some negotiation between the two. And so that's how that process works.
And to add to that, when I started with the city, I was more involved with the traffic. And so at that time, you look at, if it's a small convenience center or a bank, if it had multiple drive-throughs, every development generates more trips. And there's studies out there that say a bank with so many square footage with 2 drive-throughs generates this many trips. There's that information for traffic engineers to pull. So then depending, they distribute those trips on where they're going to pull out of their site. And that's how we look at the different intersections that it impacts. And, if it was a Walmart, there's a lot of data on what Walmart does. But those large, big box stores often bring new signals. They definitely bring new turn lanes. Those are actually easier to deal with because they know they're going to have to put in infrastructure improvements. Could be as much as signals and turn lanes, 2 signals, I think. So, we work really well together because a lot of these don't just touch the city streets, they also touch state roadways as well, or we're at the edge of the city limits, and, Josh has intersections out there too. So it's definitely on our radar with every rezoning and every decent sized project, construction project.
Yeah, I don't have really much to add to that. We follow the same protocols as far as how we review the impacts. On an extreme example, the Buc-ee's that's coming to Smiths Grove, that we've never seen anything like this before. In the peak hour, that's supposed to be like 2 super Walmarts, that kind of traffic. So obviously we ask for a traffic impact study, and that's going to require the developer to widen ramps, put traffic signals in. We've looked at everything from roundabouts, widening Highway 101. And there's already issues on the town side of the bridge anyway, but we don't make the developer fix all of the problems that have already existed. They just have to mitigate the impacts that they're bringing with their traffic. So we're working through those issues with that developer, but whether it's a subdivision or something as large as Buc-ee's, we all follow pretty well the same script protocols.
Okay, so the next question, what challenges do you think the future holds? Carissa, you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. I think is what everyone has alluded to in the first question of what our biggest challenge is. I think that also feeds into what a challenge is for the future. How do we accommodate for growth with budgets that we have today, and also as the budgets might grow, how do we respond? I don't remember which one said this, but we're often reactionary rather than being proactive with our transportation improvements. And so I think as we continue to grow and grow and grow, how do we be proactive with our available resources and continue to accommodate to the needs of the community, whether people are driving or riding a bus or biking or walking. And balancing all of those modes of transportation are very challenging, especially in a very car-centric community. And so I think we get a lot of voices from all ends of the spectrum of we need to provide better transit for people who don't have access to a vehicle. We need to provide better walkability and bikeability also to people who don't have access to a vehicle or who may want to use those modes. But the reality is that we're a very car-centric community, and our community is designed primarily for driving. And so I think that is a big challenge. Said a lot of things that are challenging in that statement, but I'll let you guys chime into that.
I guess, I'm thinking, there's a balance of requiring improvements versus getting the developments that we need. We are in a shortage of homes and housing units, and so I see one of the, probably a short-term challenge is this continued negotiation to what is appropriate to encourage developments to continue, because we need housing, we need places for people to live, but also leaving us with end products that we can afford to maintain. That tends to be the everyday discussion, is what's the best balance of government assistance versus developer finances, and really that's what we're juggling. I think the only other thing I would say is just we also need to think through how we protect the infrastructure that we built. We've seen in the last 5 years such a rapid growth in development and homes that a subdivision may get built and it may used to take 3 to 5 years to build out. Now we build them out in 6 months to a year. It's so fast that the construction damage and the home building damage and the things that we see on our public roadways, we wouldn't expect to go in and do repairs for 5 or 10 years. Now we're looking at having to go in and do repairs in 2 to 3. And we're just not prepared for that. So we're starting to think through what our policies and procedures should be to address that. So that's another big concern I see, challenges.
A couple different directions, what he's saying, from a staffing perspective, we are growing so much and things are getting so much more dense. Our road crew is not growing proportionately. And if we are having to be out there more frequent for repairs, that is going to be a challenge in the future. And it's hard to convince, even people with good intentions that, we've got to have more people to keep up. Just like we need, if we're going to build these greenways that we're showing on the map, we are going to have a budget that will maintain them. Because you build them, 10 years, you're going to need to be back out there, if not sooner. So that's one direction. The other challenge I see, and it's nothing new, is, even with the best intentions of planning, unless we can preserve these corridors, these developers have a goal to develop land and make the biggest profit, and those come in piecemeals. So they don't connect. There is no good flow from neighborhood A to neighborhood B unless we force it on them, and that's not our property. That's not our land. So, we understand wanting to protect your farms and, from these urbanized roadways, that's always going to be a challenge unless there's another mechanism in place to basically preserve that right away. Get that in advance and stick with that because I love the growth and but everybody's going to have to come out their small little neighborhood streets to get to another small little county road to get to a road in the city to get downtown that hasn't been widened to account for thousands of more people outside the city limits. So, we have to work together because it all affects, I'm just in the city limits, but they're all coming here. So we all have to work together. So that will continue to be a challenge, even with the best intentions of where we want to see new corridors.
So we've talked about funding, we've talked about workforce. I would add to that public interaction. And you touched on that just now, but it seems to be becoming harder and harder to, maybe, people just don't trust the government. I guess that's a big part of it. Maybe it's social media, I'm not sure what. But we all strive to be good representatives of our agencies and to work with the public and try to sympathize when they have concerns. But for instance, the connector to the Transpark 31W that opened in 2017, that was 10, 15 years in the works. Every property owner except the Transpark we had to condemn because nobody would negotiate. Well, of course, if you ask them, they'll probably say we stole their property or didn't pay them enough. I'm sure that's true in their opinion, but it's just becoming harder and harder to get the public to go along and to work with us on some of these projects. And we're not going to widen our way out of these challenges. I mean, folks say, you know, everybody in this room probably knows that this time next year, the bypass from the roundabout to Lehman is going to be 3 lanes. Not 4, not 5, but 3. We're going to do a road down it. We're going to maximize the pavement that we have to enhance safety and increase mobility. Get all those left turners out of the way into their own lane and let the through movers go. You go out 7:30 in the morning, you don't need 4 lanes. You don't need 2 lanes in every direction. But folks will have already said, well, why don't you just widen the road? Well, you destroy the neighborhood. You take every business and critical property, not to mention millions of dollars of water lines and power poles. That it's not realistic. You can't do that. You can't widen College Street through town, right, or Center Street or State Street. It's not going to happen. So we have to find ways to maximize the infrastructure that we have. And getting the public's trust, and that's on us, to get the public's trust, to trust us to do the right thing. That when we go out and we put a roundabout like we did at University and Nashville Road in 2014, people threw tomatoes at us. I mean, it was just like, what are you guys thinking? I mean, I know there's still some naysayers, but for the most part, you never see traffic backed up. Traffic flows pretty well. When we, just this last summer, finished our innovative intersections in Alvaton, 2 miles where you can't turn left from the side street. You have to make a right turn, make a U-turn. It's definitely enhanced the safety, and people just really lost their minds about it. That what are you doing? You're changing our driving patterns, but it's enhanced the safety because there were issues with trying to turn left across a 65-mile-per-hour road. And we're going to do more of that. We've already done some of it on Russellville Road. There's some coming on Louisville Road. So getting the public to trust us that we know what we're doing. Yes, public input is very, very valuable and vital, but to trust that we have the public's best interest. Look, we all live here too. I get stuck in traffic on Scottsville Road just like everyone else, so I know what it's like. And we want to do the right thing. And we've got to do it with the limited funding that we have. Yes?
When you put the traffic light at the hub in Lover's Lane, why wasn't that done as a roundabout? You're going to need one in 4 years anyway. You're cutting from whole cloth. Well, why?
Well, that's...
Getting the public trust when you say, well, we need a roundabout at the first one down at the university, and then not putting one where clearly you're going to need one.
So that one, bear with me on this, but the hub was a private development. So that was a situation where they had to apply through a traffic impact study to show what the impacts were. And yeah, we could have required a roundabout. When you throw that on private development, it becomes a little bit more challenging, just quite frankly. When we build new, that's a question we always ask. If it's funded by us and we're building new, will a roundabout work? Will some other innovative intersection work? But when we're requiring the private developer to do so, we do tend to try to be as cost effective as possible. But one of the questions coming up, if money was no object, what decision would you make? I would make every intersection a roundabout. I wish we could do that. No signals, definitely no new signals. So I take the question and the criticism, but it's a little bit different when we're asking the private developer to make those changes, because it's different putting in a $100,000 signal versus, say, a $3 million roundabout. It's a big ask of a private developer.
And the great majority of the spot where that traffic light is not already owned by the public. I know Chandler owns the piece from the sidewalk over, but the rest of everything that's sitting there was already part of Lover's Lane.
Well, there's a lot of pavement there, but if you were to, say, look on Google Maps and measure across the two-lane roundabout at University and Nashville Road and superimpose that on Lover's Lane and the hub, you would see that there's a pretty big footprint there. So then you're in private property that the developer is already encumbered. So I take the criticism for sure. I wish we had roundabouts at all of those signals, but it's a big ask to ask a private developer to go above, you know, the minimum that's required to mitigate the traffic.
Melissa? Money's no object, what are you doing?
Beach somewhere, got
You didn't. Well, I already kind of mentioned looking at areas and just cutting in new outer loops. I mean, I think we have to look at the growth that's already happening in the southeastern portion and find a better way than everybody funneling into Elrod Road, Smallhouse Road. I mean, it would be nice, and we have the Natcher that has been helpful, but to have that other layer, that would be, if we could just go in there and preserve it, build it, put it in, and then all these neighborhoods could connect to that. And then they would have ways to get around town and come in different, it would relieve congestion on 31W, Three Springs Road for sure. So you would distribute the traffic by building new. I guess that would be one thing. I've had my ideas about Scottsville Road my whole career, so we'll just say that. First.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think if money were no object, I would go ahead and I would go back to the interchange at Elrod Road off 165. I think that should have happened already. I think go ahead with the I-65 interchange if we know where it's going. But to Melissa's point, I mean, one of the county projects I would like to see happen in my career is to build that outer loop. You know, Dillard Road to Long Road to Carter Sims to Collett, and create that loop around that southern part of the county where we're already seeing the growth. Those are all 2-lane roads that are barely 18 feet wide, and there's not much shoulder and ditch, and you're talking a pretty substantial project. But I would like to see a much improved, probably a 2-lane section with some you know, turning lanes in the right locations. But I think that what we've done is we've said we're forcing everybody into the 3 or 4 locations to get to town, and we need to give them a way to get out. And getting onto the parkway quicker is always better, I think. Or the expressway, I still call it parkway.
Carissa?
Well, I think I would certainly agree with everyone, but I'm going to go with Joe's statement and say that I would look at improving all of our major intersections. Maybe not a roundabout is the best option, but I do love our roundabouts, so I would look at that. And I think just providing more access for the county to get into town and out of town, just as improved connections, and have more street trees. I'm a fan of street trees. Trees, just to improve safety, slow down traffic, and just improve the aesthetics of a community. It's not appropriate in all locations, but I think it is effective for our lower traffic neighborhood streets, and it provides a tighter sense of community in some ways.
All right, well, just a second. So what we're kind of to the point here, we've kind of went through all the scripted stuff we had, and so I just want to take this time to point out the website, the comp plan update website. All of the maps we talked about are linked there. The video's just above this if you scroll up. But all the resources for this session, this transportation session, are there. WKU Transit, GoBG Transit, and so on. So I just want to point all the resources out. And now we'll go to just open question and answer session, and then we'll conclude.
The audience can ask stupid stuff too, and if money was no object, my dream has always been, you've got what is now Interstate 165, you've got I-65 all coming into the south of the city. What we need is a connector north of the city with one I-165 to Interstate 65, which would open up the development for the northern part of Warren County, which is less densely populated, and provide, you know, interchanges at Glenlilly Road, all those roads that are going north. This would be a place, I mean, if you're really thinking ahead about what is going to be needed in a community of 209,000 in 30 years or so, You need to think about the development area. What district is that, fifth, sixth?
Fifth,
Fifth.
fourth and fifth.
Fourth and fifth. Less population, because, you know, if you look at a map of redistricting, they're huge. They're because they don't have any population. And now would be a great time to, you cross, I think you cross the river maybe once or twice if you connected those two roads. But think about what it would open up as far as development, and probably kind of defer the growth in the southern part up into the northern part. I mean, you look at Nashville, you look at Tennessee, they build everywhere. They build on every cliff and corner and everything. And it would happen, it could happen here too, so. Yeah.
Well, like we were talking, and the 2004 major character actually had that northern loop in there, pretty much like you spoke of, but the terrain,
Yeah, the terrain.
It-
you know,
it was just an expensive
geographically.
price tag, yeah, and it just fell off the
Well,
radar.
it's because Scotty built Old Stone and you couldn't extend the parkway. Because there was talk
We did
at one
have
point
an
of
extension.
going that.
For the parkway to keep going, and it stopped at Scottsville Road,
So-
but that was on the radar.
So this is a perfect time to tie in kind of the rest of the elements of the comprehensive plan. So the transportation piece, you're right, that would be great. And that would open it up for 1 acre lots, which we don't really build in our current economic climate anymore right now. There's a few going on, but it's mostly denser, smaller homes. It's affordability, there's just a simple cost of things. So it's typically denser developments we're seeing, and they're all on sewer. So now, if you're going to promote that type of density, we need to address our housing shortage. We've got to make sure that we're talking to our utilities to get the sewer line along there too. That's part of the reason that in my opinion, that Veterans, the northern part of Veterans, has not developed either, because there's no sewer because of those sewer's a huge price tag. So building the road is not the only piece to the puzzle. It's a very expensive piece, but probably not as expensive as the sewer would be to extend the whole route. I don't know, you know, it'd have to be studied. Not saying we shouldn't do it. It's been looked at before. It's probably time to dust that off again and take a look at that. But I think there's some significant challenges and some significant expenses to that. And we've all talked about limited funding. It's a tough equation. It's a tough balance, as Josh mentioned.
I'm just responding to that on the money.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I have a question.
Yes.
For Joe, more selfish question, I guess. Fairview, Cariacas, I don't know if that's Hampton or Ironwood. I can't
It
remember.
is. It is.
Is there any plan to do anything there? That is the perfect place for a roundabout, in my opinion.
It's that, yeah. That's it.
So it is in the highway plan.
Okay.
The MPO led a study, 2017 or 18. We had a public meeting at Eastwood Church, I think it was. And that led to it being funded in the last highway plan. So it's not, we don't have any design yet. We're not sure on the scope, but the planning study recommended a roundabout.
Oh, that would be great.
The widening for turn lanes just really is with the cemetery so close. Like I said earlier, the footprint would be bigger, so we'd be into private property, but the footprint is on the intersection versus widening that would encompass the cemetery. So
A roundabout would be
the
great.
quick answer is yes. Yes.
So I guess that's one, we kind of mentioned this before. Joe, you might be the best to speak to this. Just kind of timing funding, like the 6-year plan may not be 6 years. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, and so that's another challenge that I wish projects happened sooner, they don't. Nashville Road, that's under construction now, was this community's #1 project in 2012. It was funded in 2014. We had the public meeting, the design. We were ready to construct in 2016 or 17, and then the bottom dropped out of the budget. We went through some lean times in state government with funding, gas tax changes and all that. So, you know, now there's more stable funding. When Congress passed the infrastructure bill and signed by the president, there's some funding there that frees up funding for all the states. That's allowing a lot of these projects to be pushed through. But I use that as, that's one of our, negative examples of, it was a big need in 2012, it's under construction, will be finished in 2022. If we can get projects in 5 or 6 years, that's a good optimistic time frame. We had one in Edmonton, where brand new interchange, it took 4 years. Actually, even the roundabout, we started it in 2010, we let it in 2014, it was open for, school started in 2014, so that was less than 4 years. That's a really optimistic schedule, but more of that 5, 6, 7 year time frame for bigger infrastructure. So Caracas hopefully will be sooner, but it's not going to happen this summer or even next summer.
But Nashville Road will be done in FY '23?
Nashville Road from Campbell Lane up through the roundabout, we're out buying property now. We'll be moving utilities, but I think the construction is scheduled for fiscal year '25. And it's been that way even in the last budget. So '25 is the optimistic schedule to widen Nashville.
I'm here on behalf of a conglomerate of folks in the community called City Shapers Bowling Green. And part of our work that we've been doing the last 2.5 years has been a priority within the West End neighborhoods. And through assessment and alignment with the residents there. And so one of the priorities that came out of that was to advocate for a transportation plan that is equitable and actually works for the West End neighborhoods to have connectivity to the downtown area, the economy, and necessary resources. When you look at where the residents who live in the West End work, you spoke earlier about folks who live in the southern part of the county, driving to the northern part of the county to the Trans Park. A lot of West End residents also have to travel a good distance to get to their employment, or even just to try to get to basic needs of services. And so one of the things that has come out of that is consideration of a walking bridge, dreaming big, over Veterans Memorial. If you walk or ride that on a bicycle very often, you know how dangerous it is to try to get across that 5 lanes there. So for greater connectivity to downtown. Another is trying to develop a transportation system that could possibly include rideshare, but utilizing the chamber as well as different agencies and the businesses that are in the Trans Park to actually create rideshare programs, not just for West End residents, but for the general population. It would also cut down on transportation if you had central points of good old-fashioned park and rides. Back in the day where I grew up, park and rides were very common. Another part would be including increased time that the public transit is actually running and decrease the time that you have to ride on the bus to get somewhere. Would be an effective use of time for people, and it would increase the quality of life for people instead of decreasing as it does now. And a personal part would be that we figure out how to remove tractor trailers from going through the residential area of Delafield, especially down Pearl Street and Boat Landing Road, as they speed through the stop signs where there are children playing, and they have other avenues of roads. The tractor trailers could be going in and out instead of using residential areas.
We can definitely, the tractor trailer problem, look and see what kind of, signs only go so far, but we can see what we don't have posted in that area, and try to figure out where their destinations are.
Well, they're doing, it's in a Power Street, right? So that's where the businesses are located. And instead of turning left out of Power and going down the other way of Boat Landing and up to 185, they come all the way down Boat Landing. Or they come down Pearl Street instead of going down Power, where it is less residential or no residential, instead of driving.
We can definitely look and see what we can figure out there.
So the West End, I think we've talked about this before. There's the Greenway Project. I don't know, Ben, if you go to the bike walking G-map real quick and zoom in. So it should be constructed maybe, I'm not gonna say this year, but probably next year. I think they're just wrapping up property acquisitions for this section of Greenway. And so that will improve just accessibility for non-motorized users, whether you're walking or biking, from that intersection with Adams Kentucky Street, all the way through, runs along Veterans Memorial there, along Gordon Avenue, Double Springs, and then connects down Church Street to the trail at Hobson Grove. So that will provide some additional access and intersection improvements. I know that the city has been relatively aggressive with improving sidewalks in that area as well. And we're constantly trying to get feedback on areas that we need improved sidewalks, and so that we can improve those. And I know after our discussion that we've talked internally about how we can make some improvements to veterans and provide some improved transportation options for folks who are walking in ways that they can cross veterans. And it's challenging. I know we've talked about money and limited funding a lot. However, there are a lot of grant opportunities available with the new infrastructure bills that are out. And so we're continually monitoring those opportunities to see if there's anything that we can look into and try to apply for funding for any sort of safety improvements in this area.
Transit, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, and then as far as transit goes, it's hard. That's really the best answer I have. We've done numerous studies, and every single time we've done a transit study, one of the biggest complaints is that we need opportunities for folks to travel via the bus to our major employment centers in the Trans Park and then the South Industrial Park. And has not proven to be financially feasible. So it's a major challenge. We want to improve frequency. We want to lessen the travel times for folks on the buses. But with the amount that it costs to run a route, and with the revenue that's produced from ridership, the cost benefit doesn't really iron out to be sustainable and efficient for the city of Bowling Green, who's providing those transit services.
So we have been thinking of, continue to think of things outside the box. Times are changing. Ridership's still down for a number of reasons. Hasn't come back very much recently yet, except for Westerns. Topper Transit is back for obvious reasons. But we are starting to look at things like van pooling and rideshare demand, those types of things. Park and rides, probably not so much yet. If we can maybe find some strategic locations, that might be viable. The challenge with, say, the Trans Park is the distance it is out, and then shifts, different times. There would have to be some coordination and honestly some leniency for some of those workers from the factories on that. And then they would probably have to contribute something. I think those industries should contribute something. So we're looking at all those options. I don't think there's any kind of program that's fully cooked yet to really present at this time. But the city's kind of focusing on the routes and then the management structure and how all of that's going to shake out, but at the same time looking at some of those ideas. So keep pushing, keep telling us that's what needs to happen, and we'll I'm sure those will continue to be talked about. And I will say that we have looked at models in other communities as well. There's not really anything successful in a community our size, but for some of these alternatives, but we are growing and we are hopefully moving towards trying something. So,
well, I mean, it's been an avenue of work for a nonprofit in the community to be able to do it. And so for a nonprofit to take it on solely on their own, as Hope House has done now for several years, it's kind of unfair. I mean, it's great that Hope House has done that, but it really leaves it unfair for that to be on the shoulders of a nonprofit to do. And they run all 3 shifts to the Trans Parks. So bear in mind, things are possible.
sure.
So I wanted to add as well that there is this awareness, and we all talk about this. You may not see a lot of action yet, but there's been a lot of discussion and some things on the ground. So Melissa was talking about, I think the greenways. Carissa was talking about the greenways connection that you see here. But in 2016, after the tragedy with the little girl that was hit, so the community had asked for a signal and they got that, but also KYTC changed the lane designation. So this, again, road diet, we referred to it. But we had this 4-lane road that wasn't even a mile long that really made no sense. It's just what we did 60, 70 years ago. And you come in from the county and you hit that and it was a racetrack. And so when you design your streets to the way we have now, it does mitigate the speed. So now everyone has to funnel into one lane and it's not congested. It's just forcing people to do the speeds that are marked. And so that was an improvement that hopefully has enhanced the safety for the vulnerable users like pedestrians and bicyclists.
It's definitely improved.
And to your point about veterans, there's been a lot of discussion about trying to apply for a grant. It didn't happen this summer. That cycle has closed. But essentially, we built this 5-lane expressway in the middle of this community 30 years ago. I mean, before any of us were working. So, you know, not our fault, but we did it. Our agencies did it. And yeah, it has created some challenges because it pushes traffic through the motorized user very quickly, but it has separated the communities. And I'll give Kentucky Street as another example. A lot of folks are very unhappy about that last year. Another low-income census tract there, not the West End necessarily, but with WKU, vulnerable users, you have other low-income census tract there. You've now taken Kentucky Street, which was never a congestion issue, never. And now what was commonly a racetrack from, you go around the curves at Western, it's a racetrack to Hot Rod Stadium. Now we force everybody to use one lane and follow the speed limit. State Street is the same way, although that's a city street. But those are things that we can do to design our streets to make it safer for the vulnerable user. Does a bridge come? I don't know. You know, there's pros and cons. If we put a bridge here, what are these folks going to do? If we put a bridge here, what are these folks going to do? So a bridge maybe fixes one spot, but really what we need is the entire corridor improved. Maybe that's raised medians. Maybe that's ways to funnel pedestrians to certain areas and make it a 2-stage crossing with a pedestrian signal. There's things that we can do, and we've had a lot of discussions about that.
I think that the future pedestrian outlets that are going to come there on Ford and along will be very helpful.
Yes, I think so.
Just adding on to the road diet conversation, when I'm in neighborhoods and they're talking about, their cut-through streets, how feasible is it for us to create a plan with our overlay plan that we do every year? We're in neighborhoods and there's a cut-through street, figuring out how to do that creative painting on Kentucky Street to force folks to slow down, which, for instance, could slow down those tractor trailers trying to use Pearl Street. Even if they ignore it, how do we use painting, curbing, other things, bumps?
Speed bumps.
Yeah, we can't just, speed bumps maybe with the cuts with, for
I
emergency
think there's
vehicles.
appropriate places for speed bumps.
Yes.
We've not been using those, as you know. Curbing would be helpful. There's lots of what they call a toolbox of traffic calming measures out there. Striping is a good idea, but people learn that they can just, if it does this, the ones that are going to speed are just going to go straight through. Physical barriers, physical chicanes, which is basically brings people tighter, maybe weaves them around in some of these smaller neighborhoods, would work, but at a cost. So it's
I just
concrete
think
is
it
not
would
cheap.
be good to maybe just try it. Like, can we have an experiment where, Covington is so, there is no reason why that street needs to be that way.
Oh, on the, well,
Protected bike
we
lane.
narrowed the one half and we got mixed reviews on that, although I think it has slowed people down.
But, I mean, just
But
like,
the other half.
if you stripe down the middle and put parking lanes on the side, and you're just reducing the width, or Maryland, or, what's the Shawnee Way, like, just thinking through, how can we slow people down?
Yeah, we tried some striping, although Shawnee is a straight stretch, so, the speed tables came out, but the striping does with you pull people in and give some shoulder bike lane area for people to walk, but, and it does help some. Those that are gonna speed, we found out they're still gonna speed. So there's other things that we can look at, implement. I think we're looking at one of those streets now that we discussed. So we'll see what we come up with. I know Florida, when I first started at this position, was big on access management and traffic calming. They had, and I was at a conference down there in some of the little neighborhoods, and they had chokers and not many like traffic circles. And so it made you kind of a, I don't know, Pine Grove kind of has some of those, or traffic circles on roundabouts. But those come at a cost. So, if we could encourage that in some of our newer neighborhoods, we might not be left with some of these problems, which we realize. It's just hard to ask that of a developer unless we make it a requirement. So, but we'll definitely look into that.
Other questions?
Melissa, you mentioned one thing. When we're constrained by moving power poles, that sort of thing, to what extent has anybody approached PGMU about burying these things? I mean, they always say it costs money. When are they coming to the table to better the community? Hell, a power pole doesn't snap a tornado if it's on the ground.
There's maybe a blunt answer, but as soon as you as a ratepayer start paying them twice their rate to bury it, I mean, they're an agency funded by rates as well. Last I heard, I don't know, some of you guys that are a little closer to it may know, but just to bury, especially some of these bigger power lines, you're looking at 4 times the cost as it would just string it, just the poles, strings on the pole. And but we're talking magnitudes, we're talking millions and millions of dollars, to the point where some of them cost as much as it does to build the road.
What
So
about when the street's already open? You dig a big hole to fix a water line or a sidewalk in or whatever.
but that's a section, that's a
You also got to
typically
when you
100
look at
feet.
If you look at a 3-phase power line in the air and how wide that is, it usually has a 100-foot easement with it. You can't just dig a 5-foot trench and throw the electric line in it. You're talking about digging a trench that's 12 feet wide.
They have to be spaced out so much, and then that's neglecting the fact that there's gas lines under there, AT&T lines, other water lines, that there's no space below those lines to put them. So you would have to encroach on the properties and have easements, which just...
It can be done.
It can, I mean, it could be done, but yes, you would have to have a pretty large buffer area for them to go in spaced out. The electric so far from the water line, so far from your cable line.
Spacing between your fiber optic and your telecommunications
They
from your
can't
electric. They can't be within so many feet.
And,
So
and multiple providers in that case.
That can fall under the category of money was no object.
Yes,
Yeah.
it would definitely be my preference. If we're doing a road project and we're having to move half the poles over, we would love to just put them all underground, but we can't afford that. We'd never build roads, and that's not something they can afford either.
So it's
So,
clearly encouraged to do developments. They're
oh,
all there.
definitely.
And they're setting rates.
Oh, but they're regulated, their rates are
Well,
regulated.
the developer's paying that burial cost.
They pay the difference. Right?
Yeah. I mean, BG&U's new building doesn't have underground power. So, I mean, they chose to build their own building and not bury those power lines. I mean,
It's
It's
definitely
tough.
a pie in the sky. If we could get rid of everything overhead, I would be all for it.
And some network wires up there.
Yeah. We all can agree. Yes. One project we failed to mention, and it's kind of affects us all up here, Cave Mill Road.
Yes.
So Cave Mill Road, from where the widened section ends at Grider Pond, and it goes on past Natcher Elementary, Smallhouse Road, and then at Covington Grove, it widens back out. That section obviously is congested, could use some widening and some improvements, and we've all known this for a while. It's been probably our number one outside of the highway projects priorities. Part of the road is in the city, part of the road is in the county. But fortunately, through the highway plan, we have secured some money to spend getting a design in place, really all phases, but first step is up to construction, yeah. Getting a design for improvements along that route. So we are working right now on a request for qualifications that will go out soon to look at what we can do. Obviously, widening is going to be needed, turn lanes are going to be needed, some multi-use paths, sidewalks, some combination of through that area. So I failed to mention that, but we all have touched that, and it's
That's been a priority for
a long time.
Yeah. It's more of a priority in the last few years, just recognizing the growth and even the safety issues that are on.
With the school and, they have a crossing guard out there today.
And we also need to thank our legislators as well that kind of helped push that up the priorities and get us the funding. Really, don't know, the funding piece was on our radar and on our hope wish list, but I don't know that we thought it was in the realm of reality this fast. And so thank legislators and Joe and everybody else pushing that. And it's a good time to mention that our local legislators do participate in the MPO process, especially during when we rank and score projects. So they do participate with us as well. Go ahead.
One more question, transportation related.
I'm not answering questions.
What's the official word on golf carts on the roads?
They're dangerous, but I'll let Melissa answer.
Oh, I
The
honestly
city?
don't know the
Not a
exact
golf cart
regulations.
community,
I think that they're allowed on 25 mile per hour roads.
I think
Am I
so.
right?
We have to look
Hillary may know more.
At the ordinance, I think they have to have lights and seat belts and turn signals.
Street legal.
They just seem to be becoming a substitute for vehicles with 14-year-olds moving around.
Well, and you have to have a valid operator's license.
We do see them a lot. Well, it depends on the neighborhood too, but
See them on the
they definitely
Greenway every day.
put some requirements on them. I don't know, I've yet to hear of anybody being checked on that.
They're not supposed to be on the Greenway, but they are.
Yeah, they're on
It's a
the,
great example of how signage can only.
they cross Cariacas a lot.
There is a small section that you can't go from neighborhood to the park, unfortunately, without jumping up there or being in Cemetery Road. So I do hear that a lot.
Any other questions? Don, you got anything for us? All right. All right. Thank you all for being here. We'll look at housing next month.